So hello, everybody, and welcome to session 13 of the PWL International Seminar, the monthly seminar of the FCT-funded project, Mapping Philosophy as a Way of Life. We have a very, very special guest today, whom I'm very, very happy to introduce, even though most of you will certainly know him and his work. Simone D'Agostino is full professor of history of early modern philosophy at the Gregorian University in Rome. He has worked on the reception of Aristotle in 19th century French spiritualism, focusing his research on phronesis, theory of action, and habits. More recently, he has turned his research to the tradition of philosophy as a way of life in early modern time, focusing in particular on Montaigne, Bacon, Descartes, Spinoza, and Locke, among others. In 2023, a translation of his book on spiritual exercises and modern philosophy was finally published by Brill, to the happiness of those who don't read Italian. And the title is Spiritual Exercises and Early Modern Philosophy, Bacon, Descartes, Spinoza. He leads a research group at the Gregorian University dedicated to philosophy as a way of life. And he's also a consultant of this project and has been involved in it since its very inception. I still remember the last time you were in Lisbon. I remember I closed the application.
The night you closed it.
So you were there from the very beginning, and so thank you also for that. And it's obviously a great pleasure to have you here today. So his talk today will focus on one of the authors he has mostly studied in the context of spiritual exercises and philosophy as a way of life. The title is Logic as a Way of Life in Descartes and the Cartesians. And without further ado, I will give you the word, Simon. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marta, for inviting me, and thank you to everyone for being there. So I'd like to share my screen and go to my presentation. Okay, in full screen. So the expression, so the talk, first of all, I will be talking in 3 points today. First of all, the Cartesian framework, then Locke's conductor, the understanding, and finally the association of ideas and its therapy. So I changed a little the prospect I've given, thinking that will be more interesting talking about more Locke than Descartes. But so you will hear. So what about the Cartesian framework? The expression logic as a way of life may seem almost contradictory, since usually the PWL paradigm is seen as an opposition to the theoretical formalism typical of those philosophies, especially the analytic variety that make logic the highest expression. Yet there are many reasons to look with some suspicion of this easy opposition. One of these reasons is certainly the peculiar way in which PWL tradition predominantly developed in the Western philosophy in the early modern age. This, as Foucault already pointed out in the course of 1881-82, was initially characterized by the reform of the intellect. I will not return to these themes today, since I have developed them in my book last year, published by Brill. I would like instead to explore a somewhat new area in our attempt to mapping PWL, namely the presence in John Locke's philosophy of instances traceable to the Hadutian spiritual exercises. So I will therefore make a brief introduction on Bacon and Descartes, already subject of topic of my previous book, and then devote my talk today mainly to Locke, and this is my new research. I would like to begin with what is perhaps the most emblematic work for the reform of logic in the early modern age, namely Francis Bacon's Novum Organum, published in 1620, as the second part of the Instauratio Magna. The 1620 book is a rather complex text that is both a design for a 6-part mega work and the publication, however, of only a small part of it, predominantly the second part. To get an idea of the plan of the work, we can turn to the Distributio Operis formulated by Bacon. So this is the plan of the work, and it is made up of 6 parts. The first is the partitions of the sciences. The second is the Novum Organum, or directions concerning the interpretation of nature. The third, the phenomena of the universe or natural and experimental history for the building up of philosophy. The fourth is the ladder of the intellect. The fifth are precursor or anticipations of the philosophy to come. And the sixth is the philosophy to come, or the active science. So all the interest, all the center of this of the novum, of the Instauratio Magna of the book, of the 1620 book, is the second part, in fact, because 90% of the text published there was only the second part. And in the subsequent explanation of these 6 individual arguments by Bacon, nearly all focus is placed on the second and also the third part, the Historia Naturalis. The first part is only briefly presented as an organized summa of the learning and doctrines possessed by mankind, so as to demonstrate what remains overlooked and omitted. The fourth is barely described, and the fifth is considered simply as a first installment of the 6th. So I would now like to quick turn to one of the works that has most taken up the legacy of Bacon's Novum Organum, namely René Descartes' discourse on the method. Keeping to the text written by Descartes, it not only begins by assuming that the whole discourse will be read in one sitting, but furthermore suggests an alternative so that you may divide it into 6 parts. In the 1637 edition of the discourse, the 6 parts can be retraced by the description which Descartes summarizes in the prologue, and this is the text. I will not read this in French, but following the terms demarcated by Descartes, their thematic order can be synthesized as follows. So science, method, morals, metaphysics, physics, and at the end, the research on nature. So calling to mind the prospect of the 6 parts of the Instauratio Magna, we already said, so that it is not hard to draw a few analogies. So the Cartesian text begins, like the Instauratio, with a consideration of the failing state of the sciences, followed by the new logic or method, and thanks to which it will be possible to ascend to the first principles, that is, to metaphysics, cogito, the existence of God, and so on, and from there descend again to the operative knowledge of nature, that is, physics, with the ultimate goal of bettering and effectively prolonging human life, and this is in the 6th part, the final part of the discourse. So in both the Novum Organum and Descartes' discourse, method, or the new logic, plays a pivotal role that is placed after an examination of the failure of the sciences and as a means of consequently bringing about their revival with the aim of improving the lives of human beings. And the pivotal role of method will shift the emphasis of philosophy more and more to an analysis of the processes by which the mind erroneously or correctly makes its judgments, giving rise to very important philosophical works whose purpose is to restore the mind in its healthy use. I'm thinking here of Malebranche's Search After Truth, for example, or John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, and then, of course, Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason, which in his own words, is nothing but a treatise on method, in Kant's own words. And this is the frame, so the pivotal role of method in Bacon and Descartes. And now I'm going to the new research I'm doing. So this is on the conduct of the understanding by John Locke. From what can be certain, John Locke's writing of the conduct of the understanding was mentioned for the first time in a letter to William Molyneux, dated the 10th of April, 1697. So I've lately got a little leisure to think of some additions to my book. The book is the essay concerning human understanding that had already 3 editions. 89 is the first, 94 is the second, and 95 the third edition, 2 years before this letter. And within a few days have fallen upon a subject that I know not how far it will lead me. I have written several pages on it, but the matter, the farther I go, opens the more upon me, and I cannot yet get sight of any end of it. The title of the chapter will be Of the Conduct of the Understanding, which, if I shall pursue, as far as I imagine it will reach, and as it deserves, will, I conclude, make the largest chapter of my essay. So the next edition, here mention of the essay, is the 4th edition, the next edition. 3 will have been already published, which would be published in London, the 4th edition, 2.5 years later, in early December 1699. From this letter, we also learn that the text under Locke's hand is taking the proper form of a chapter, for which reason he foresees it as a considerable addition to the essay, and the title of the Conduct of the Understanding is an obvious echo of the subtitle of the Discours de la Méthode pour bien conduire sa raison, and this is to conduct the understanding. And so this is a clear quote. Indeed, this manuscript, because it remained a manuscript, currently catalogued at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, contains several writings identified as additions to the essay. There, under the section titled Of the Conduct of the Understanding, we find a clear indication of its intended position. This is Book 4, Chapter 20, as you can see in the box. So just before the final chapter of the book. And this proposed location never came to be, for Locke never managed to complete or publish this new chapter. What is noteworthy, however, is that the conduct, from its very conception, represented the author's intention to provide a therapeutic counterweight for some negative or problematic epistemic aspects. Drawing a comparison with the closing chapters of, you can see here, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4, and the final chapters Locke intended to wrote and added in the various editions of the essay concerning human understanding, we can see some symmetries. For example, Book 3 ends with Chapter 11 of the remedies of the foregoing imperfection and abuses, the abuses which are in need of remedy, obviously those indicated in the previous chapter 10, the abuse of words, language. Likewise, Book 2 is enriched with the final 33rd chapter in the 4th edition, namely that of the association of ideas. We will talk a lot about that today. And the 4th book will be augmented with a new chapter on enthusiasm, while the final chapter on the conduct of the understanding will remain only on a level of a manuscript. To recapitulate, during 6 years stretching between the 2nd and the 4th editions of the essay, Locke proposed to make 3 editions. In 95, Enthusiasm, an association of ideas, in which diagnostics of some pathologies of the mind is proposed. In 97, the conduct of the understanding, which also aims to offer therapeutic. And from this perspective, the conduct of the understanding fits into a wider strategy, as you can see, marking Locke's growing interest in the remedies that his philosophy might offer to the problems raised by language, by religious belief, and assent in general. And in each case, the treatment of mental pathologies or of its possible remedies is placed at the end of the related books. And this fact, in my view, would seem to indicate a classical structure, at least as regards the Aristotelian organon, where the collection notably concludes with the sophistici elenchi. As Aristotle himself would say, the sophistici elenchi are a follow-up to the topica. The specific objective of the work, the sophistici elenchi, is well synthesized by the pseudo-Alexander. In the present book, so as to offer us a remedy able to ward off the sophistic maladies, Aristotle examines the sophistic syllogism, making a strong rebuttal of the sophistic argument. In this, striving as far as possible for truth, on whose behalf the charlatan's cheap fallacies and widely held presumptions are disproven. So, a case in point is that the general framework of Locke's essay, as it will be for the critique of the pure reason of Kant, is symmetrical to the main parts of the Aristotelian organon, which were coincidentally maintained by modern scholastics in the textbooks of logic, as elsewhere. For example, the Manuductio ad logicam sive dialectica by the Jesuit Philippe du Trieux was among the textbooks in use at Oxford during the time Locke studied there, likewise to be found among the volumes of the philosopher's personal library. A small table may help visualize this structural correspondence. You have here the organon, the Manuductio, the Philippe du Trieux Manuductio ad logicam, and then Locke's essay. And as you can see, there is a strict correspondence of categorie of ideas, the interpretazione of words, analytica of knowledge, topica, or the locis dialecticis is opinion, sophistici elenchi, so the locis sophisticis, and then at the end, the conduct of the understanding. So the last two arguments deal with, in the essay, namely knowledge and opinion, plus the anticipated final chapter of the conduct, correspond to the three types of syllogism classically treated by Aristotelian logic. And this is certain syllogism, probable syllogism, and obviously sophistic syllogism. And these last two are confronted by du Trieux, as you can see, as the two halves dividing the fourth treatise, De Locis Dialecticis and De Locis Sophisticis, and correspond respectively to Aristotle's Topica and Sophistici Elenchi. So the evidence that Locke conceived, the conduct of the understanding within the sphere of remedies for the errors of the intellect is confirmed also by the text opening remarks delineating its scope and content. Locke himself begins to explain why it is so important to deliberate upon the correct use of the intellect. And this is why, in Locke's words, the logic now in use has long possessed the chair as the only art taught in the schools for the direction of the mind. This is Descartes' title, in the study of the arts and sciences. You see here easily the correspondence with what we said at the beginning about Bacon and about Descartes. To show the inadequacy of scholastic logic used for centuries by scholars as the direct heir of Aristotelian logic, Locke now turns to the authority of the great Lord Verulam, so Bacon, quoting a passage from the Prefatio to the Instauratio Magna, Pars Secunda, Novum Organum. This is the passage. I will not read this. I'm going directly to the translation, to the English translation that Locke himself did. And this is a text for which Locke himself provides an English translation, including an additional verse from the Prefatio, which can be found at the end of the paragraph following the one quoted above. I'm going to analyze this text more carefully. I'm not reading this now. So given that the Latin text, the original Bacon's Latin text, differs in only a few details of punctuation from the original, what stands out about this translation is that it is the only extensive quote in the Conduct, and also that Locke took it upon himself to translate the passage into English. And you have the original Latin by Bacon and the translation by Locke. So the first thing to take note of is that Locke translates dialectica with logic, and this appears quite sensible based on what we have previously said about the attention given by to dialectic in the modern scholastic textbooks. In the sense that the title given by Dutrieux is exemplary, is the Manuductio ad logicam sive dialectica. And the second thing worthy of note is the fact that Locke understands intellectum humanum sibi permissum to mean the human intellect left to itself. So not so much as the intellect left without any aid, like Bacon, but rather in a more juridical sense as confiding in the sole intellect without any proper safekeeping of the rules of logic to corroborate its testimony. And with respect to the content of the two excerpts taken from the Prefatio of the Instauratio Magna, Locke's principal objective consists in coming to the realization that logic has long been considered the best remedy for the errors of the intellect, and yet, I quote, the remedy reached not the evil, but became a part of it. You have this in blue in your translation, in the slide. This is a rather loose rendition of the Latin, verum infimior omnino est malo medicina, nec ipsa mali expers, which can be translated literally as, truly, the medicine is altogether worse than the ailment, nor even free from disease itself. So for this very reason, it becomes absolutely necessary to introduce a better and perfecter use and employment of the mind and understanding. This is in Locke's words. So in the following paragraph of the Conduct, with the marginal title Parts, so the plan of the Conduct, Locke is still more explicit about the nature of his writing. The notion that a few rules of logic are thou sufficient in this case for those who pretend to the highest improvement is a clear echo of the Cartesian position in the discourse on the method. Locke would hereafter add two more phrases to the paragraph. The first, fully aligned with what precedes, concludes that it is easy to perceive that men are guilty of a great many faults in the exercise and improvement of this faculty of the mind, which hinders them in their progress and keeps them in ignorance and error all their lives. And in the next instance, he further specifies some of them errors I shall take notice of and endeavor to find out proper remedies for in the following chapters. So Locke's underlying idea is thus the following. Human intellect, by its own nature, is affected by a series of multiple defects. And these defects limit the development of the human faculties, impeding them to reach the perfection to which they might have aspired had they not been snared by multiple errors. One of the determining factors in this failed development is the fact that the very nature of such defects renders them altogether unobserved to the mind, making them very difficult to correct. Herein, the dual scope of the conduct is subsequently deduced. So first, to evidence what these errors are, and then to indicate possible remedies for them. And these initial indications, validated by the lengthy quote of Bacon, clearly place the conduct of the understanding within the tradition that sees philosophies as a medicina mentis, as a medicine of the mind. So the new logic Locke intends to propose is the logic of ideas, as Locke himself claims at the beginning of the manuscript. The errors of the intellect are fundamentally of two species: the want of determined ideas and of sagacity and exercise in finding out and laying in order intermediate ideas. Both of these errors are therefore attributed to ideas as taken in themselves on account of a lack of clarity and distinction in their conception, or as taken in relation to other ideas on account of lack of the intermediate ideas that serve to associate chains of reasoning when concordance is not self-evident. Let me now turn to the third point of my talk today, the association of ideas and its therapy. Because association of ideas, in Locke's opinion, is the most dangerous of the errors of the mind and the most difficult to amend. The opening line of the section titled Association in the manuscript of the conduct is very interesting because it would outline a different treatment with respect to the essay, assuming they are two separate works published at different times. Let's see this text. Though I had in the second book of my essay concerning human understanding treated of the association of ideas, yet having done it there historically, as giving a view of the understanding in this as well as its several other ways of operating rather than designing there to inquire into the remedies ought to be applied to it. So in the essay, the treatment of the association of ideas has a nature that follows the historical plain method preferred for that work. And this method would be inspired by Baconian natural history and a medical methodology of the historical kind as derived from the careful observation and documentation of symptoms. In other words, with the essay, Locke offers us the diagnosis of the association of ideas, while the conduct tries to find a therapy of association of ideas. The text continues specifying that in lieu of this curative or therapeutic purpose, Locke will propose a few elements for consideration to all those who desire to conduce their own intellect properly. And the primary reason it is worthwhile to do so is that association of ideas is as frequent a cause of mistake and error in us as perhaps anything else that can be named. And is a disease of the mind as hard to be cured as any. It being a very hard thing to convince anyone that things are not so, and naturally so, as they constantly appear to him. Therefore, Locke places the association of idea as the most frequent and incurable of errors. Now, the indispensable question that should be asked is what Locke means by the expression association of ideas, and also why he apparently attributes a negative, so strong negative value to it. For the mere fact that the mind would associate ideas does not seem to be a pathological phenomenon in itself. According to Catherine Tubb, in a recent paper dedicated to enthusiasm and association of ideas, I quote, Locke was invoking the early modern signification of the word association as an ominous confederacy or union, end of quote. So therefore, for Locke, there is no such thing as a wrong association of ideas, because the very act of associating ideas is what in itself leads to error. Though historically Locke coined the expression association of ideas for the first time, its meaning is quite different from what it will take on in later authors, such as David Hume, for example, or the history of associationism that is in psychology very well known. Of course, while it is all too evident that Locke conceives the essay from its first chapters as an explanation of the difference between knowledge and opinion, only at a later moment it seems does take note of the demand to further specify a third aspect concerning error. As a result, according to the classic repartition which we spoke of at the beginning, three objects of logic emerge: knowledge or certainty, opinion or ability, and error or falsity. And knowledge, according to Locke, could be intuitive or demonstrative and also sensitive. It is, this is knowledge of the real existence of particular things. And we can err in our opinions, but also sometimes in intuitions or in demonstration, obviously in knowledge of the real existence of something. And the association of ideas is to be placed in contrast with knowledge, and particularly with real knowledge. In fact, initially, Locke's analysis of the association of ideas assumes natural or real connections as a proper term of comparison. For example, in this text, some of our ideas have a natural correspondence and connection one with another. It is the office and excellency of our reason to trace these and hold them together in that union and correspondence which is founded in their particular beings. So the association of ideas is therefore defined in opposition to natural or real connection as a casual or customary, meaning not due to nature, but to what which is often called second nature. In this case, implying that this second nature is not in accord with nature. For example, in this text, besides this, there is another connection of ideas wholly owing to chance or custom. Ideas that in themselves are not at all of kind, come to be so united in some men's minds that it is very hard to separate them. They always keep in company, and the one no sooner at any time comes into the understanding, but its associate appears with it. And if they are more than two, which are thus united, the whole gang always inseparably shoot themselves together. So it is for this reason that Locke does not hesitate to define the association of ideas as madness. Literally madness, not metaphorically, but literally madness. In general, a strong combination of ideas can have a double origin, either voluntarily or by chance, and this is voluntarily when the combination is fruit of a specific training acted out by its subject, for example, musician, a dancer, something like that. Causal when a chance event, often traumatic in the examples Locke choose, or a series of unanticipated circumstances is the cause of the connection. For example, an aversion or a nausea. But more than anything, Locke aims to underline the typical unreality of associations, as in this most eloquent example. The ideas of goblins and sprites have really no more to do with darkness than light. Yet let but a foolish maid inculcate these often on the mind of a child, and raise them there together, possibly he shall never be able to separate them again, so long as he lives. In the essay, the therapeutical difficulty concerning the association of ideas is traced back to one very simple reason, namely that in the case of association, the mind would be asked to cure itself by itself. And this is because reasoning is incapable of influencing a connection that has occurred independently from it. Thus, only time seems to provide a remedy through the forgetfulness which it generally ushers in. Therefore, the Lockean argument in the essay seems aimed primarily at emphasizing how dangerous it is to inculcate false connections of ideas into someone's mind, since these are almost irreversible. And this argument appears to be addressed to educators, or in general to those who have a role in shaping minds. It's different in the conduct, in the manuscript. Locke is more explicitly set on finding possible remedies for the association of ideas. So in the essay, Locke is more skeptical than in the conduct. On the one hand, there are the remedies to association before it occurs, and we call this prophylaxis. And on the other, the remedies to association after it has occurred. And we call this therapy or cure. And regarding the first, they more resemble a set of precautions. So Locke's proposal might well be summarized by the precept, prevention is better than cure. But finally, Locke turns to the persons who have time to dedicate to study and to the search for truth, for example, the philosophers. And for such as these, for the philosophers, Locke concedes a single principle that should be inculcated in the mind by constant repetition, effectively forming a sort of preventative rule, literally in Locke's words, a caution against this evil. The evil is the association of ideas. A rule that is like a medicine that serves to immunize the mind from the occurrence of an association of ideas. That they never suffer any ideas to be joined in their understandings in any other or stronger combination than what their own nature and correspondence give them. And that they often examine those that they find linked together in their minds, whether this association of ideas be from the visible agreement that is in the ideas themselves, or from the habitual and prevailing custom of the mind, joining them thus together in thinking. So Locke suggests here the use of a mental technique that is meditation or examination that recalls the philosophical spiritual exercises typically practiced in ancient schools, especially the Stoics and the Epicureans, as Pierre Hadot has pointed out in many studies, as you all well know. The philosopher is called upon to care for a series of principles, logoi, which one, once repeated and assimilated, go to form that rule of life, a canon, by which the soul is fortified and prepared as by an armor, so a paraskeue, enabling him to react in the face of difficulties. On closer inspection, the rule Locke proposes here echoes the first precept of the new logic in Descartes' discourse on the method. And this is, I quote, never to accept anything as true if I did not have evident knowledge of its truth. End of quote. In Locke's theory, the Cartesian criterion of evidence becomes that combination of ideas which is due to their very nature. But, and this is very interesting, Locke also foresees the possibility of intervening, after association has taken place in the mind. So to cure association when habit has established it. And in this case, the therapy proposed by the philosopher is as follows. He who would like to cure an association of ideas that occurs in his mind must nicely observe the very quick and almost imperceptible motions of the mind in its habitual actions. And in support of this therapeutic proposal, Locke refers to what he argued in the essay about the so-called Molineux problem. I will not dwell on this point, which would require too long an explanation. But the last issue I would like to address, and so turn to the conclusion of my talk, is how can we understand Locke's suggested cure for an association of ideas that has already occurred? As we have seen, Locke does not offer much guidance other than to argue that we should nicely observe the rapid habitual movements of the mind. But the text we find in Essay, second book, chapter 1, may help us. Here, Locke tries to explain why reflecting more or less on the inner operations of one's mind procures a greater or lesser variety of ideas of reflection. And the reason is as follows. For thou, he that contemplates the operation of his mind, cannot but have plain and clear ideas of them. Yet unless he turn his thoughts that way and consider them attentively, he will no more have clear and distinct ideas of all the operation of his minds and all that may be observed therein, then he will have all the particular ideas of any landscape or the parts and motions of a clock, who will not turn his eyes to it, and with attention heed all the parts of it. So Locke here, in explaining the inner reflective action of observing the operations of one's mind, he emphasizes attention. Attention, understood here as detailed observation of the object, is what enables the transition from confusion to clarity. So the picture or the clock may be so placed, is in Locke's, where I'm quoting here Locke, the picture or clock may be so placed that they may come in his way every day, but yet he will have but a confused idea of all the parts they are made up of, till he applies himself with attention to consider them each in particular. So, according to Pierre Hadot, attention, prosoche, is the most fundamental of the philosophical spiritual exercises developed by the ancient schools, in which it often had the therapeutic goal of keeping the philosopher in a state of constant tension and concentration on the fundamental rules of one's conduct, as on the present moment. The kind of attention proposed here by Locke is a voluntary contemplative act directed to the observation of every single detail of the object, resulting in the acquisition of a clearer and more distinct idea of it. According to the conduct of the understanding, attention therapy for an association of ideas which has already occurred consists of a voluntary, reflexive act directed at perceiving those habitual movements that are normally difficult to observe in the internal activity of the mind, as they are very rapid and almost imperceptible. The qualification of these movements are as imperceptible emphasizes their passive nature, which attention seeks to counterbalance by active reflection. Therefore, it is not a matter of correcting the association of ideas through the contemplation of sane and correct ideas, as Catherine Tapp rightly points out. Instead, it is about acquiring a sort of mental habitus aimed at the careful observation of the habitual mechanism which join ideas together. In conclusion, for Locke, both in the case of preventing the association of ideas not yet occurred, and in the case of cure for an association that has already occurred, it is a matter of forming a reflective counter-habit in the mind by meditative exercise in one case and by attention in the other, a counter-habit which is capable of actively counterbalancing subjection to erroneous habitual bias. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simone, for such a rich and exciting talk. Thank you also for respecting the time. We now have 35 minutes for discussion. Is there anybody at the audience who wants to make a question? Elder.
Thank you very much, Simone, for the presentation. It was very fascinating for me, and I saw many points of contact or many affinities with ancient philosophy, also with Plato, not only Aristotle. And I was wondering if we can take from your presentation the following conclusion. So trying to see how these might affect or not Adorno's main concepts, spiritual exercise and philosophy as a way of life. The way you presented the framework of Locke's thought, it seems that the type of exercise that is being described is always a type of intellectual exercise, and even the reference to attention or meditation seems to be conceived in strictly intellectual terms. So it seems as if the different types of exercise would all merge into what Hadot presents as the second category in the essay on spiritual exercise, the intellectual exercise. And there seems to be no reference, at least in the passages you brought to the discussion, to some sort of life impact. So it's probably present in other texts, but it seems that it seems to be more connected with the perfection of thought and perhaps perfection of contemplation, and it's not exactly clear what would be the practical impact of this. So it's perhaps very clear in other passages of the text, but my knowledge of Locke is already very faded out, so I'm not sure if there's this reference. And finally, this notion of mental habitus. So this was one of the points that I was also missing, any reference to habituation. So there was the negative habituation, so the negative habitus that the mind might have. But I was wondering if there was also some positive habitus, or if habit played some role in these spiritual exercises. And I was wondering if this state that one attains, or what one attains after one does all the prophylactic treatment and also the corrective treatment, if one attains the state that is impervious to errors, so it's free from errors by itself, so one would not need to continue doing these treatments, one would be cured forever, or if this is something that one must constantly repeat and constantly keep doing, even after carrying it out as much as one can. So these were the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Helder. So your 3 points are these so-called Lockean spiritual exercises intellectual? Absolutely, yes. They are completely intellectual. They are mind exercise in Locke's own words, I would say. Have these mental exercises life impact? Oh, yes, absolutely. They have a religious impact. They have a political impact. They have an academic impact. And Locke brings in many, many, many examples. One of the most important things he works on is education of children. Because if we are giving them false associations of ideas in the beginning, it will be very, very, very difficult to eradicate these associations. So educators are probably the most important people in the world. So mothers and fathers and professors and so on, every kind of type of educator. Because when you have false association of ideas, you will believe in something false in religious belief, you will believe something false in science beliefs and political, and so on. And so from this point of view, the life impact from this mere intellectual therapy, we can discuss about that. But in Locke's idea of a mere intellectual therapy, have a great life impact according to his own opinion. And what about is one cured forever? No, nobody's cured forever. Nobody's cured forever. You have to all your life be attentive, all your life prevent false association, because every day you are exposed to false association of ideas from everything, from everywhere, and from what you read, from what you think, I would say in our own words, fact checking, because this is from an empirical point of view. So the real existence of things is the most important cure, but you have to have a habit to always search for a fact check of opinions and so on and so on and so on. So we are never cured forever. And these were the three questions, and have I answered well? So are you satisfied? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, very satisfied. Thank you very much.
I see there is another question by Pedro Dotto, but maybe I had a follow-up. I had a question in mind that was very closely connected with one of Elder's questions, which has to do with the impact of this medicine of the mind on life itself, which is a very important point for Hadot's notion of philosophy as a way of life. And when I was listening to you, I kept asking myself, or I was wondering if this medicine of the mind is developed by Locke. And it was very interesting. I'm not so familiar with Locke's work, and it was very interesting to read him or to listen about him from this perspective. And I was wondering if what is the connection between this medicine and particularly action, behavior, or the conduct of one's life. Maybe you already gave an answer to it, but maybe it's a question of maybe priority or motivation. I was asking myself if this would be more comparable to the Hellenistic therapies of the soul, which were clearly subordinated to a transformation of one's action, behavior, the redirection of individuals towards, I don't know, the good and flourishing life. So the correction of reason or the intellect was itself dependent on, or was itself meant to enable a flourishing life or a good life, or if it would be closer to Wittgenstein's therapy, philosophical therapy, which seems to be more internal to philosophy itself, or more connected to an epistemic problem than an ethical one. So I would ask, yeah, maybe this is the best way to put it. Would Locke's philosophical therapy have an ethical or an epistemic motivation or priority?
Okay, thank you, Marta. I would say absolutely that in Locke's mind, the question of the association of ideas is a problem regarding ideas. So we have to work the way we put ideas together, the way we learn ideas, the way we work with ideas. So from this point of view, it's more spiritual in the sense of, I would say the second, the Wittgensteinian way would be more analog to Locke's idea. It's truly a medicine of the mind, and this exercise. So for example, the attention he's trying to propose is completely a mental exercise. One big problem would be to understand the role of the will, because according to Locke, attention is a voluntary act, and we have to say why, from what source the will would act in this particular way, so that the mind will not have false associations. So which will be the motivation for the will? And this is an interesting question. I would say that in Locke's mind, is more coming from the intellect to the will. So this will be, I think, the order, and not the contrary. Not from ethics to the intellectual. I don't know if my answer
no, that's very interesting.
clearer
And now
than your question.
And now I have a second follow-up, and then I promise I shut up and give the word to others. Why do you consider these mind or mental exercises spiritual exercise? It's very interesting that in Hadot's description of spiritual exercises, or in his essay dedicated to the topic, when he's justifying his choice of these polemic characterizations, why did he choose spiritual and not other possible characterizations? One of the possible, or some possible alternatives, were thought exercises or intellectual exercises. I think also mind exercises. And he says they don't really work, because in his conception of spiritual exercises, the whole self was involved. They were not exercises that happened only in thought, but had an impact on the whole being, implied a transformation and implication of the whole being and not just the mind. Would you feel this as contradicting in a way your characterization of Locke's exercises as spiritual, or would you, or how would you justify?
I would say that spirit, according to Locke, is mind, and these exercises are by which we act on, we work on ideas. So from this point of view, there will be intellectual, so to say, exercise coming from going to the first question by Helder is the first point.
Okay, thank you. I will now give the word to Pedro, then Laura, and then Matteo.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Simone. It was wonderful to hear you learn a lot about Locke. And after that, I'm not very familiar, so this is the disclaimer. I have two questions. You've answered to both Marta and to Elder that spiritual exercises are intellectual, true and true. Are they also solipsistic? So I'm considering this intellectual exercise not on the side of education in a pedagogic context, so prophylaxis, as you presented, but on the side of the cure, of the therapy. Is it entirely solipsistic? Is it an intellectual solitary monologue that a subject entertains with him or herself to examine the chain of ideas? Or is it something for life that is achieved in dialogue, in the context of a school, which was the case in the context of Hellenistic philosophy, of the Hellenistic schools, which you would not better or improve your epistemic condition simply with your own subjective resources? This is my first question. My second question concerns the epistemology behind these spiritual exercise, this intellectual exercise, what's called this reflective second order counter habits of examining the chain of ideas to see if they are founded on a natural connection of ideas or on a mad association of ideas. So how can the subject, with his or her own resources, discover if he's in the right track or in the wrong track? What is the index that the connection of ideas is natural, or if it's just a mad association of ideas? So how does the subject, out of his own resources, reflecting and examining his chain of ideas, can tell if he's in the right track or in the wrong track? What would be Locke's answer?
Okay, thank you, Pedro. What about dialogue? By reading Locke is one of the most important political philosopher of the modern age, but in this case, I would say that there is no dialogue in this mental care or mental attention to the strain of ideas and so on and so on. I have seen no dialogic strategy in Locke's conduct of the understanding or in the essay. Sure, educators can ruin or not my children's minds or so on, but this is another point. This was not your question. This is easy to understand. And so the first question is linked to the second, because it's always which would be the index, which would be the fixed point you have outside in relationship your mind can confront with. And I would say that Locke's answer would be reality. So the cure, so you have to care on and to pay attention to the way your mind is connecting ideas together and confront. And this is why, and so you can, so that you can check every time if reality is telling you the same connection, or you have many different ways of put ideas together. One is intuitive, but this is more difficult to have wrong associations of intuitive ideas. So this is not so common. And also inopinion is not so dangerous, because when it's clear that your opinion is only an opinion, the association is always in question. But with a sensible or or with judgments about reality, judgments on reality, judgments based on the perception of reality. Oh, is this the point where association of ideas is more dangerous, according to Locke? So the actual being of something or reality is the index, I would say, is the index.
Laura?
Thank you so much, Simone, for your talk. I am not a huge fan of Locke, and this talk is doing a lot to redeem him for me. But I have two questions that I think might be continuations of the conversation at hand already. And one is going back to the educational question. In his thoughts concerning education, Locke makes this move that most of his contemporaries make, where he links logic and rhetoric together, right, as one conversational topic. And when he's talking about teaching logic and right reasoning, he says that children shouldn't learn logic in any formal way or rhetoric in any formal way. I have the quote in front of me, actually.
Yeah.
The reason is because of the little advantage young people receive by them. For I have seldom or never observed anyone to get the skill of reasoning well or speaking handsomely by studying the rules which pretend to teach it, right? And in the next paragraph, he has this kind of long conversation on we can't actually learn right reasoning through logical disputes, because then we're concerned with, as Mary Estelle might say, victory instead of truth. So one of my questions is, I guess, what is Locke's method of education to teach this kind of right reasoning, or to overcome or avoid this association of ideas, if we can't teach it to young people through them learning the rules, what's the best way, according to Locke, for people to learn how to cure this disease of the mind? A follow-up or additional question to that is, you mentioned a really cool structure or method earlier, following the Baconian structure. So I'm wondering if that overall structure is also present in his work on education. Like, can we read his stuff on education to say, here's an outline that matches the structure of his other writings, or that matches the discourse, or that matches Bacon? And then a separate question is actually about dialogue. Specifically, his dialogue with Damaris Masham. They were both very influential on one another, particularly on religion. And you mentioned that religion is one of the practical outcomes of this association of ideas. So I'm wondering if Masham actually had any influence on Locke in this area that you're looking at.
Okay, so 3 questions. Thank you, Laura. They're very, very interesting. So I think that Locke's opinion that children should not learn directly the logic rules is more stick to the old logic and not the new logic. So it's completely useless, according to Locke, to make children learn the syllogistic or scholastic as he himself did at Oxford. So is criticizing strongly his own education. And Locke's idea is more than, it's very interesting in some talks concerning education, the work, Locke's works on education, that is more always concerned with freedom. So children have to find themselves the rules, have to work themselves on their own minds. No one can work or cure from the outside the mind of another, but we can help a children or someone to cure himself or herself by its own work on its own mind. So in this sense, this would be also this new logic is a logic based on counter habit, but you cannot force a counter habit. This is useless. Sorry, you have to promote to someone, and you have to build to create this counter habit by yourself. And this, in my very quick answer to your very deep question, would be my opinion on that matter, on the first point you raised. On the second point, are the work on education have the same logic structure or not? No. This is for the essay. So the essay was meant exactly as I've shown in the same structure of the Aristotelian organ, as in Bacon's words, a new organ. So the essay concerning human understanding is really a new organ, like the critique on pure reason by Kant will be a new organ in Kant's own words, explicitly. And the Kant's critique is based, the structure is a textbook of logic. And the dialogue, yeah, I don't know. On your third question, I don't know, but it's true, it's absolutely true that dialogue in Locke's life was so important, and he had so many correspondence and personal dialogue, and he always said that dialogue is so important in living, learning, etc. But I stated my first answer to my previous answer that this particular mental exercises in the conduct of the understanding are not dialogistic. I don't know if the word exists in English, but are not dialogic, sorry, are not dialogical exercises.
Can I ask a really quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Going back to your first response, I'm wondering how this notion that, well, children have to learn this on their own, right? That's part of freedom, almost very Rousseauian in that way. How does that mesh with his empiricism, particularly something he says early on in the essay about education and environment, right? Like, the ideas that we have come from our environment. So if you want to keep someone totally ignorant, you keep certain things out of their environment. And this is something that Mary Estelle actually used to level an epistemic assault against Locke, particularly about the implications of education, especially for women, right? Like, well, if this is our notion of education, then this is how people remain in ignorance. And she takes this more Cartesian turn where it is more focused on one's own intellect. So I guess I'm wondering, like, how your emphasis on children must do this completely on their own. You know, there's like some outside supplement, but it's really an individual intellectual exercise. Like, how does that mesh with other things he says about his empiricism and education and the role of environment?
Okay. So what we normally call empiricism, so has to do in Locke's philosophy on the structure and the relationship between ideas. So this relationship could be intuitive, demonstrative, or sensitive. So in this sense, every mind can have, or in every age and gender and so on, can have ideas and relate ideas only intuitively, demonstratively, or with sensible experiences, by experience. And in this sense, I didn't see something in contrast with the idea that this kind of exercise, mental exercise, like cure to the string of your thoughts or attention, for example, you have to do it by yourself, and no one can really pay attention to the way your mind is relating ideas together. So for this reason, you have to do it by yourself, and no one can force you or teaching you or saying that you have to do this way. And reality or the nature of ideas is the same for everyone in Locke's mind. But well, okay, this is another question.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, I don't know if it was.
We have 3 further questions, and now I need to ask you to be brief. Matteo?
Yes, I'll be super brief. Many thanks, Professor D'Agostino, for your presentation. So I was thinking again about this association of ideas and the example, one of the examples that you provided, namely that of the association of the idea of a goblin with the idea of darkness, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So
correct.
There seems to me to be a kind of possible moral connotation here that is implied by the notion of darkness, which would certainly make Locke's meditational exercise very much compatible with what Hadot called famously, the Stoic discipline of assent, the Stoic discipline of judgment, or the practice of logic. So I was wondering whether this was the case with Locke. So I'm wondering, is the problem with the association of ideas one of moral judgments, or like it was for the Stoics, or is it a problem with any association of ideas, like regardless of their moral worth.
Any association of ideas.
Any association of ideas.
Any association of ideas.
Okay,
There could be moral judgments, epistemic judgments, or physics, chemistry, and everything.
Right. Okay, okay, yes. Very brief. Thank you.
Annie, a warm greeting to you. Nice to see you there.
Nice to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor D'Agostino. So my question is very naive. I'm not well informed. I've read Locke decades ago, so it's not a very well-informed question. But what I could benefit from, I think, is examples of association of ideas that should be examined and gotten rid of. And I was thinking of a possible similarity within ancient philosophy in Epicureanism, for example, and you can tell me if I'm in the right direction here to think of what Locke has in mind. So the Epicureans tell us that there is a fourfold remedy in order to reach ataraxia. The first remedy is to remember that death is nothing to us. The second one is that the gods are nothing to be feared. And if you realize this, then you can start living quietly and without anxiety that you're going to be punished in an afterlife, and so on and so forth. So the way they reach this second remedy is through a kind of what we could describe as a conceptual analysis. It's very simple. They say, take the preconception, the prolepsis of the gods. So this amounts to examining the essential features of a divine being, which are, according to Epicurus, immortality and being blessed, being totally undisturbed, perfectly happy. And so if you realize that these are the essential features of the divine, then you can stop being afraid of gods, because they are undisturbed, they are happy, they cannot be disturbed or angry at you. Actually, they don't even care, because they are in a sphere where they are perfectly blessed, totally happy, continually. So is this the type of work that Locke has in mind, in terms of taking concepts and kind of analyzing what is essential to these ideas and kind of being able to discriminate what we should not associate with it, like here, fear with the gods, for example, in Epicureanism. Is this, could you give me a couple of examples? Because goblin and darkness, for me, I was not expecting this to be the problem. I was more expecting something like goblins and existence, but so if you could give me a couple of examples, that would help me a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Annie, for your question. And I think Locke's kind of mental exercise I was trying to show are in that direction of the Epicurean one you mentioned, but Locke would say, I can try to explain this on this example. So your habit is to connect gods with fear. And so if I'm correct, Locke thinks that why you have to ask yourself, why I associate the idea of God with fear? What is the training of ideas I am doing when I make this connection? And so you have to, yes, analyze. You have to carefully go on and to pay attention on the way you are doing this kind of association that is not natural association, because from the natural point of view, the nature of the idea of God and the nature of the idea of fear are not linked together, and so on and so on and so on. But you're doing this, and you are doing this as second nature, as a habit. You're normally you normally tend to do this association. And the way so nicely observe the way you're putting these ideas together, and probably there is something emotional, I don't know, there is something aesthetics or educational or something your father said, or I don't know. But there is something that puts you in the condition that you are linking things that should not be linked together, and this is association. So this, if I can enter in this example, would be the kind of association. So, but we have to distinguish two different. Nicely observe before making this association, or attention after this association was made by your mind. So these are two very different kinds of, and in Locke's opinion, before you can do a lot of work, it's possible to prevent a lot more possible to prevent false association of ideas. But after, for example, in the essay, we have a chapter on association of ideas. And in this chapter, in the essay that was published in the fourth edition of the essay, is completely skeptical. Once an association of idea is in your mind, it's quite impossible to break this association. In the conduct is only a manuscript, never published. Locke seems to be more optimistic about the possibility of working after an association has occurred. So I don't know if my answer has cleared your, if I answered your question or not.
You provided a very enlightening general information, but I was hoping for concrete examples of ideas that are associated that Locke thought we should absolutely divide, like very concrete ones, if you could think of any.
Yeah, there are so many ideas that we can. I can provide examples, but I'm trying to remember Locke's examples. So the answer would be that, yeah, I have a general answer. For example, yeah. One very concrete example in the essay is enthusiasm, for example. Enthusiasm is religious enthusiasm. In religious enthusiasm, someone thinks that he received directly from God an instruction, for example. And Locke is completely against this possibility and sees the danger, the very big danger that someone says, God said me to do this, to have I don't know, to bomb me in and out in a bus or something like that. And because we can analyze this, and for example, religious enthusiasm, and show that if God said something directly and personally to you as an individual, you can never prove that to someone else. You can never have, because God simply directly said it to you or something like that. I don't know if this example on enthusiasm satisfied you. Okay, thank you.
And last but not least, a very, very brief question by Gianfranco.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor D'Agostino. Really, I have a lot of questions, but I just do one. Yes, of course, following just one remark of Marta, precisely about the interpretation of a spiritual exercise. And Professor D'Agostino was very clear when he said, for Locke, spirit is mind, and what is right for Locke is precisely right for all the English philosophical tradition, and more precisely also for all the logic tradition. The spirit is mind. So my question, of course, is this: or the risk, of your wider interpretation of philosophy as a way of life is precisely this, that all the mental logical interpretation and approaches can be interpreted as philosophy as a way of life. In this case, what Adot precisely says, that mental exercises are not spiritual exercises, is not precisely right. Not just just I want to point out this question. Thank you.
Okay. I was thinking, and I lose the answer. I had already the answer in my mind, but it was following your question. Can you rephrase that?
That is
because
just
I lost the answer. Sorry.
No, that it was just this, that you say for Locke, and mind, spirit is not is mind, is equivalent to mind.
Okay.
In English,
I get it. So I would say that in the early modern time, the PWL tradition, so to say, is shaped in a certain particular way. So the way the early modern philosophers understands what, for example, soul or mind or a spirit is, and how, for example, emotions and passions and sentiments and so on are in the mind. For example, for Locke, there are ideas of this, ideas of that, and so on and so on. So I think that, and this is my point, that there is a very peculiar way in which the early modern philosophers received and reshaped so it is exactly a tradition. So it's something that is received and put forward, so bring forward. So this would, I would not say that this is I'm widening, so I'm putting it wider, but an historical. I'm trying to show that in that time these concepts were conceived in that way.
I think precisely this, that your interpretation can be precisely enlarged.
Sure.
Adot's interpretation. It's of course, it's my opinion.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, we have already exceeded our time.
Yeah, sorry.
And I will now thank you. I will now need to close this session. I thank you once again, Professor D'Agostino, for this very, very exciting and illuminating talk. It was very, very interesting. Also for the discussion, the Q&A. Very, very interesting. Thank you all also for being there and contributing for the discussion. The next session of our seminar will take place on the 19th of June with a talk by Pedro Toto, the scholarship holder of our project. And yeah, hope to see you then. Thank you once again. Bye.
See you.
See you.
Ciao.